no. Like, if you have an opportunity to go and join a startup, like, go do that. You're going to learn a ton. The first year that I was at Freshbooks, we tripled that team size on the product development side. I think we hired close to 100 engineers.
Wow. You saw that you weren't hitting the metrics and you said, I'm not going to risk more capital here.
Yeah, there has to be enough of those potential S-curves to invest in a company. Try to experiment, especially with AI coming in the way that it is. We're going through that transition. So much is changing.
You're in your mid-20s, you're working at Magmic Gaming, and you become the head of engineering. How did you get that far ahead so quickly in your career? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Matan Hazanov. Today, we have a very special guest, Ryan Henry. Ryan has an incredible background. He was the first director of engineering at one of Canada's few unicorns. That's a company that's reached over $1 billion in valuation, but he has a tremendous amount of experience building startups, leading startups, and eventually becoming an investor in startups. And today, if you want to learn how to build an incredible business, especially if you're looking to scale engineering, which Ryan did by hiring hundreds of engineers at one point, you have to listen to this episode for his insights and his recommendations. Ryan, it's great to see you.
Great to be here.
Take us back to the beginning.
I guess. How far do we go
All
back?
the way back, man, however you want.
Let's go back, I guess. I'll quickly go through beginning of career. I guess I went through university, started at U of T for computer science, moved back to Ottawa partway through that so that I could basically work full-time and go to school full-time. So finished my computer science degree at Carleton while working at a company called Flightscape until I eventually got into the mobile gaming industry. So I guess where do we want to dive in?
Yeah, so mobile gaming, you're a gamer growing up. I know that. We spoke before, obviously. And you eventually went into mobile gaming. This was like the BlackBerry era where you can start playing like games, like sophisticated games on your phone, right?
Yeah, it was such the beginning of let's say the smartphone world certainly started before the iPhone. But really where I got into it was at about exactly that time. So I think I joined Magmic Games in Ottawa in 2008. The first iPhone had just come out the year before, but really everyone in the business world was still on BlackBerry. People in the non-business world were using some smartphones, Windows mobile phones.
Yeah, but by the way, for the Gen Z people, BlackBerry used to be a company in Canada that was actually much more popular than anything Apple put out in the phone category until they released the iPhone, which I think their first phone. And the company didn't do so well quite afterwards, which is a whole story in and of itself. But yeah.
Which is a fascinating story. I mean, certainly in the business world, BlackBerry was incredibly successful, but didn't capture the consumer mindset.
Right.
And I think that's actually relevant to the story of Magmic as well. We were one of the first game developers for BlackBerry and old phones, JTOMI Brew phones, the old flip phones. This was pre-iPhone, pre-Android. The way that you used to build games and get them onto phones then was all about carrier relationships. There were no there were no real app stores. And so you were building games really for a microcosm of mobile game developers, business people who wanted games on the go. And I feel like the way that whole space changed once Apple came onto the scene and released their app store, and really every consumer went into the current smartphone world, I think is just that's a fascinating story that doesn't have so much to do with me, but really that's where I got my like tech start.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was much younger playing Snake on the Nokia brick phones, and that made me so happy. I got addicted to that stuff. I'm like, oh, this is the best thing ever. Right? Today, like nothing can hold my attention for more than 20 seconds. But back then I'll sit for like 2 hours playing the stupid Snake game, It's amazing how things change, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, the types of games that we classify as mobile games now, and that whole industry, how it came about and how in-app purchases came about, like really the way that we work with mobile devices just fundamentally changed at that time. So it was, I look back at that time and really think about just how much has changed since then, since that world. We had the internet then. Facebook was primarily on the internet only. It hadn't really even crossed into whatever their current, having developed React and kind of going down the mobile world. But it was interesting to see that change, the generational change from primarily web internet to then mobile apps and how all of that worked. And just to be at the forefront of it was, in retrospect, just fascinating to go through.
So you're in your mid-20s, you're working at Magmic Gaming, right? and you become the head of engineering, I understand, right? Which is pretty amazing. How did you get that far ahead so quickly in your career?
Yeah, so when I joined Magmic themselves, this would have been in kind of early 2008. They were going through a bit of a growth spurt. Obviously, the smartphone world just before Apple kind of came on the scene was growing quite quickly. Apple kind of just jumped into that into the tailwinds there. But so when I joined Magmic, I can't remember exactly how big the team was, but I remember talking to one of I think the head of product, one of the guys that really brought me on and kind of mentored me at Magmic was Jeff Bacon. And I remember before I joined Magmic, we were just kind of talking about where I wanted my career to go and all of that. And he kind of like implied and promised that, like, given the scale and given the growth that Magmic was seeing, that very quickly I'd be able to like lead a team. And I think at the time where I was just heads down, like being a developer, that seemed interesting and fascinating to me. Just like that scale of growth and obviously just to like move my career forward quickly. That was something I kind of jumped at. And I started building Windows mobile apps and doing a lot of like porting of games so that they'd work on different phones. I'd say I was a very good developer. I did that job very well. But I never wanted to only be a developer. I guess growing up, I was kind of always a natural leader. So just kind of jumped into fell into the leading the mobile team, and then kind of taking over we owned a massive portfolio of games. I think there were over like 200 games that we supported across like, I don't know, 50 or 60 different types of phones, screen size, quality of phones, everything. So I started to kind of own that portfolio. Obviously not like the owner, not like the business owner, but more like the head of engineering owner for that. And I feel like at the time, my mindset was more on certainly the games from a product perspective, but then from a director of engineering or a head of engineering perspective, more from a project management perspective. I feel like at the time, everything in my mind was more about the work. How do you schedule the work? How do you prioritize the work? And I don't think even the concept of how do you manage the team, how are you a leader to the team, that hadn't entered my understanding of what it was like to be the head there.
I imagine that changed as you.
That didn't change. I mean, we'll jump ahead maybe to Freshbooks in a minute, but it took a while, I think, for that mindset to really develop in me. I was I was still so early in my career, learning what it took to be a developer, learning what it took to be a team lead. How do you even schedule all of this work? How do you work with people? Like just more of the operations of running a team.
You feel like you were too young to be leading? You led like a couple dozen people at one point.
Yeah, I don't feel like age ever really came into it with me. I feel like, and now, I mean, certainly as an investor, like I love to invest in young, inexperienced people because there's so much passion, and I love hiring those fresh out of school developers because they don't know what they don't know. You give them a challenging thing and they're just going to go and do it because they're hungry for it. Exactly. Certainly was not cynical. So I feel like the age thing never really crossed my mind. If anything, the opposite. I almost always wished I was maybe a little bit older to get more of that respect, but it was never, I don't really feel like that ever like held me back. I don't think I was ever criticized because I was young, but also everyone around me at the time was young. And yeah, I guess just building those teams, it felt normal and natural.
Right. So you're on this kind of, I guess, rocket ship at Magmic, right? And then you decide to go to Freshbooks, which at the point that you joined, I mean, you're still a growing company and all that. But why decide to make that switch?
Yeah, there was actually a bit of a gap there. So from Magmic, I joined a kids entertainment agency in Ottawa called Fuel Youth. The guy I mentioned, Jeff Bacon, had kind of gone over to Fuel to start their first mobile development group. Had a chance to kind of join him from basically day one, building that mobile platform. It was such a fascinating experience there, getting exposed to like just quality brands. McDonald's was our kind of main client. We worked with Disney. We worked with Mattel. I worked with the Barbie team. Got exposed to just like amazing teams, amazing quality of products, and got to work on just fascinating tech. For me, I think as much as I was always a gamer, it was more about the tech for me. Games have always been something that pushed the boundary in tech. So at the time, we were building a mobile platform. we were starting to experiment with augmented reality on mobile, which even now is still kind of nascent. So it was just fascinating to work on interesting technical challenges, building up something new. That I feel like that very much along with Magma kind of started my career and started me understanding like what does it take to be a good developer? What does that look like? How do you build good quality products? And then my wife, I guess, kind of bridging now to FreshBooks, my wife had gotten into a second degree in nursing. We moved to Toronto, and so I was working remotely from Toronto to the team in Ottawa. And this
remotely
was
before that
this was long before
was
COVID, long
yeah.
before it became normal. And like you could do it, like we were using Skype, but like being the only remote person and like the remote manager for all my team being back in Ottawa was so tough. I'd get people would have like a product planning meeting and like they'd just forget to dial me in, or sometimes like you've got like the team all in one room and I'm trying to like be there on the speakerphone, trying to interject and not just like dominate the conversation. It's just not like it was not a productive environment, and that started to wear on me quite a bit. So I had mentioned this, I didn't always want to be a developer. So I'd kind of started to talk to friends, and I always had a personal interest in finance, and I had some friends in investment banking, and they're like, "Oh, come to the finance world, like do your CFA exams." And so I ended up a bit of a side tangent, did my CFA exams, bit of as a personal challenge, bit of like, let's see what I can learn here. And so kind of as I was going through that, I guess that was probably the first time I really got exposed to the venture capital world. I somehow, and I don't really remember how, got connected to Omer's Ventures. They were hiring an associate at the time. And so I got connected to Sid Paquette, who was one of the partners, and kind of went through their whole process. If I recall, it was narrowed down to myself, I think maybe one other, and Prashant Mehta, who is now a partner at Panache. Prashant ended up getting the associate role, but in conversation with Sid, one of the things that Sid mentioned was, as much as he liked my kind of management background and my tech background, he didn't really feel like I knew what it was like and what it really meant to be like a high growth startup. And in retrospect, like, yeah, I didn't, like, I had the tech, I knew how to build teams, I knew, or at least knew how to manage teams, I knew how to manage product, but that the whole concept of like high growth startup, no. So he connected me to a company called Freshbooks. They had just raised their first institutional round, I guess having been like a bootstrapped company for almost 10 years, they raised probably one of the largest Series A's in Canadian history, and like a true Series A. So like they raised a $30 million Series A round.
In Canada, that's like exceptional. You know?
Exactly.
In the US, it's happening every
in
day.
retrospect, looking back, like, yes, like just exceptional round, exceptional company, like really understood like that path. And so when I joined FreshBooks, the product engineering, so the development group and QA and product and all that, was around 30, 35 people. The rest of the company, I'm not entirely sure the whole size, but so they weren't a tiny company. I was really brought on as let's say like the first like middle management layer within FreshBooks. So, like you had your teams and team leads, and you had a CTO, but there really weren't like the anticipation of scaling FreshBooks. I think they recognized that they needed to start to expand out that middle management group. So I joined as the first director of engineering. And at the time, I was really focused on that scale, and I didn't know what scale really meant. The first year that I was at FreshBooks, we tripled that team size on the product development side. I think we hired close to 100 engineers.
Wow.
And that scale, like,
without getting your job is basically hiring people.
It was, yeah. I think that first year, I think I did something close to like 800 interviews. Maybe that was like the first year and a half, but it was like everything was about how do you scale the team? How do you manage that consistent onboarding of the team? How do you find the right people? How do you just live within that chaos and continue to grow and continue to build the products that you're building, find new products to build? So I think that one of the first kind of couple teams that I was involved with, one was on the growth marketing team, one was working with the finance team doing revenue recognition models, one was I think we built out the first data engineering team at the time. And that was aside from like the core like FreshBooks product team. FreshBooks at the time had also just started to experiment on the payment side of things, and that was really the kind of the group that I ended up getting more involved with. So I saw scale from the engineering and hiring and side of things. I saw scale from growing up a brand new product. So this was the payments product, which when I joined was basically zero. But by really over the next couple of years, that side of the business had grown to as big as the SaaS side of the business. So again, very quick scale on the payment side. I got exposed to building data teams and building ML and early AI teams. So just like incredible experience from a growth and like true venture scale perspective at Freshbooks.
Right. And eventually your team grew to like a few hundred people, right?
Yeah, I think so. When I left, the entire FreshBooks team was around 350. They hadn't yet gone global, which they did a little bit before the pandemic. I don't recall the specific details, but we had continued to grow like pretty consistently throughout the time that I was there.
Mm-hmm. So hiring people at scale, managing people at scale, what are some lessons you learned about, first of all, let's say hiring people at scale?
Yeah, it has to be like very much system oriented. You can't just put like, I wasn't posting a role and like I wasn't looking at every single resume that came in. That would have been like tens of thousands of resumes for all of those jobs. So certainly, how do you build that engine within FreshBooks, working with the HR team, working with the recruiting teams? How do you like what is your first step in interacting with a potential candidate? How do you make sure that candidate is a good fit for your teams? How do you then make sure that candidate is a good developer? And those are two very different. To me, to us, they were two different interviews, but two important and probably not even equally important. I would say it was more important that someone would be a good fit for the team rather than the best engineer. We could turn somebody into the best engineer.
That's interesting. Usually you hear a lot of the different perspective in startup plan. You want your 10X engineer, lock them in a room and let them.
And so I would agree with that from the 10X engineer, but you don't hire the 10X. You don't go and post a role to find the 10X engineer. You develop your 10X, or you get lucky and find that person. But especially when you're hiring that many people, like if you're tripling the team, every month or so, you're kind of spinning off a new team within a department. How do you actually start that team? Do you take one or two people who know the culture, who know the code base, and go and they're now 2 of 5 or 6 people on a team, and you just throw a bunch of new people onto that team? So there isn't an answer to that. There's not like one playbook, but you really have to understand what are the growth rates of those teams like? How do you evaluate whether a team is performing, storming, performing, norming, or high performing? Build some criteria around that. How do you know when people are ready to kind of lead a team, just like I was in my early career, just kind of pushed into that? There's so many moving pieces, and just being able to thrive and survive within that chaos. I often talk about venture scale and that venture scale growth and kind of the challenges that come along with that. But that thriving in chaos is one of the most distinctive elements of that.
What would you say is like the most critical factor when you're looking at another person? You have probably a few great candidates for a particular role. You're probably the final boss in the hiring process, or maybe not. I don't know.
I think you try not to be, but again, it comes back to that process. You try to say, well, what does success look like? Who would be the ideal candidate? How do we, as unbiasedly as possible, evaluate that candidate? And then how do we decide? And if you end up with 2 great candidates, and certainly when you're growing that quickly, you can probably just take on both. There's not really a downside there.
Aside from like the obvious things of people being unprepared or just saying stupid things, is there like a major red flag when people come like interview and it's just, hey, like, that's stupid, guys. Why are you doing this? Like, it's an automatic no.
Yeah, that's a good question. We tried to design the process even from like resume review and then to like a phone screen before we'd actually bring someone in. You'd catch most of the red flags in that. Right. Like most of the early process is not designed to find the person; it's designed to filter.
Right. So that's what you're talking about, frameworks and processes. And
exactly. Because again, doing that at scale, reviewing those resumes, like I would probably be the final review of the resume once it went through like the recruiting team, but they're filtering out a ton of candidates just to make sure that you're doing it as optimally as possible. I think once you bring somebody in, you're not you're probably not going to find red flags unless something just went off the rails in the interview, which did happen, but it was not like those were exceptions. I think really then you move away from how do we like what red flags are we looking for in order to filter out people to who then makes the best fit. FreshBooks was always very focused on culture, like team culture, product culture, customer fit culture. One distinct development actually about FreshBooks that everyone who started at FreshBooks probably still starts at FreshBooks goes through a month of working on the support team. Doesn't matter whether you're a developer coming in or the CTO coming in or a CFO coming in, you do a month on support. And that month of support, obviously like you're well guided and trained for this, but you're on phones with customers, you're answering emails of customers, you're dealing with support issues, and you get to know the product, you get to know the customers, and you get to know the team before you even start day one in your role. And that is important. FreshBooks had a strong culture focus. They had this long acronym that was probably too long, or that was Porchfest, and we can go into all the nuances of like what that meant. But really, from a company culture perspective, I think it's one thing to be aware. Then there's also like the team culture perspective, knowing within the like the product and engineering group, how do they work or what's important, knowing within this team or the type of role or the type of work that they're going to do, what's important. And so much of that has to be deliberate when you're trying to find that match in candidates.
Mm-hmm. Right. So do you have a perspective on how AI is shifting the amount of engineers people need to hire? Like, should people even go into software engineering at this point? Or
Yeah, I'm definitely not one of the people who are like, oh, the software engineering is dead. Like it'll all be completely automated. I think what we're seeing in AI is a new abstraction layer from a development perspective. But I think maybe the two main points that I would make about AI within software development is one, as a leader in engineering, there's never a point in your life where you're wishing for fewer developers. You have so many things that you want to build. So new products, bugs in products, new ideas, new experiments that like, if you just gave me 1,000 times more developers, like, yeah, I could probably find work for them. Mm-hmm. So the idea that people won't need to be doing that and it'll just be all AI. To me, I look at like, if I can have as many people as I do and more AI, like that's great. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true across any discipline, whether it's sales or marketing or whatever. So to me, AI is we're going through this change of like, how does it augment? How does it change the number of people that you need? And maybe you could probably do with less today. But in terms of the like long-term opportunity, I don't think humans just get displaced by AI. I think we operate alongside the AI, but at a completely different scale. And so then the second point and related point to that I would make is, to me, AI in software development is adding an abstraction layer that it used to, when I started my career working on mobile games, it was hard to get games to work on these like super underpowered phones. Much of my technical time, developing time, was diagnosing memory issues, super low level performance, memory management, like really like low level issues. Most of the software development world today doesn't need to operate at that performant level. We have tons of compute available and you can make something. And so now it's focused more on the product and how do you scale the product. If you add AI now into that next layer of, well, now you don't necessarily need to understand the nuances of architectural design. How do you kind of keep clean code? How do you refactor this code? How do you make this code maintainable and testable and all of that? Like you can abstract away all of that. And now you get down into what makes a developer, an actually really good developer, is often someone that can think in terms of systems and can abstract away the technical nuances and understand what the product high-level architecture needs to be. We'll even get to the point where maybe people don't even touch the code directly, but you'll still have developers or programmers, like systems engineers, thinking about what does the system look like? How do you architect the system? And then maybe the AI will just kind of go and implement all of the nitty-gritty nuance details, performance details, documentation details. And just if you think at that scale, like the more that a single developer can do, orchestrating an entire system versus managing a single function or two, or writing a few test cases, like really we're just making any developer much more performant. We're obviously in this transition. When I talk about venture scale, to me, everything venture scale is an S curve. And that like vertical part of the S is just chaos. Things are changing. It's hard to know like really what direction it's going and how it's going to change. And you sometimes are just kind of holding on for your life through that change. We're very much in that mode right now. It's super exciting. I think for some people, it's probably super nerve-wracking. If you're the type of person who likes rules and structure and knows where their place is going to be and follows steps 1 to 10, it's probably sometimes tough because you might jump from step 1 to 10 tomorrow, and now you don't need steps 2 through 9. But I love that chaos, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. Let's say you were at Freshbooks today. Let's say the equivalent, all else is the same, except for we have the same AI technology. How many engineers would you have hired to accomplish the same thing? And where do you think that'll be in 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because I think if you only think about it from the perspective of how many do you need and how does that change like the capital funding requirements, I think you can get away with less, certainly. Mm-hmm. I think you probably could have a much smaller team. I think you might naturally then kind of follow that path and be like, okay, well, therefore companies need to raise less. Therefore, like we shouldn't throw $100 million funding around at these companies. But I don't necessarily think that's the right framework. Certainly, I mean, and
I've been telling all my
you and I both invest at the super early stage, and I think you can do more with less, and I think that's important. But I don't think that negates the opportunity of having a massive funding round, and what new or different opportunities does that create now that you wouldn't have been able to achieve five years ago. And so I think that's that S curve that I was mentioning. It's not clear what the end result will be. I think in today's funding environment, we absolutely are seeing fewer dollars being able to go further at the early stages. You're seeing teams of certainly less than 10, sometimes less than 5 people get from 0 to a couple $1 million in ARR very quickly. That's not where it ends. I'm curious to see, along that same path, having a 10-person company, now if you throw a massive amount of money at that, how would that change that opportunity? What are the new scale opportunities that we can achieve? What does venture scale now become? If it was a small S before, maybe it's a massive S now. I don't, there's not an answer to that. And I'm curious to see what it becomes.
Mm-hmm. So you've seen kind of a rocket ship. You are part of, you're a significant part of helping Freshbooks grow. What are maybe a mistake or two that you've seen either in your investing practice or a place like Freshbook, where it's like, hey, don't scale like this because it leads to bad consequences?
I think it's not necessarily, I mean, certainly in retrospect, you can look back and be like, well, that was a mistake.
Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah, like I'm not trying to say there are no mistakes, but I think it's maybe more important to say, well, what's the potential? What are all of the experiments that we want to run? What are the crazy opportunistic risks that we could take, and should we take that risk? I encourage the companies that I invest in to take those big risks, and hopefully to take them deliberately. I sometimes hate when we just fall into something working. Not that that's a bad thing. That to me is just luck, but you can structure that luck by saying, well, look, we have these opportunities. Here's how we think about reaching those opportunities. Here's how we would hopefully know if they're failing. And you hope that one of those opportunities leads to, I mean, certainly if you're on the venture scale path, leads to venture scale. That's not a guarantee. So I think in most cases that I would look back and say like that was a pretty big failure, it was probably because we didn't plan on it, or we didn't spend enough time thinking about the consequences. There were some times, and certainly related to why I ended up leaving Freshbooks at a time that it was still growing quite quickly, was really just like, I would have done it a different way. I would have scaled this team a different way. I would not have, I think one of the big discussion points that we had at the time is we were moving, or there was some conversation around moving to not having a dedicated QA team and having pushing more on the automated testing, trying to have developers do that. And that means that people's roles are impacted. And how do you transition that? So that in itself is from a like running the business side of things challenging, but also wouldn't necessarily have been the direction that I would have gone.
So
and
you
that
wouldn't
type
have gone. You mean less automation on the QA?
Not so. To me, the automation was important, but I probably would not have changed the QA team in that way, because at that point that was not. I don't want to say part of the culture, but that was part of the way that those teams worked. And I think we can jump ahead to Wisely. I feel like one of the lessons that I've learned is that trying to change the way that people work, especially over a short period of time, is probably the most challenging thing to do. And that change management and how much time and effort goes into that, I would really question whether it was worth putting in that time and effort for the potential gains that we would have had. We could have ignored the people change and focused exclusively on the automated testing side from a quality or performance perspective. And maybe one would follow from the other. But to me, it's focus on the opportunities, focus on the potential. And I feel like the operational changes will just come. And actually, maybe that's a point that I would reinforce. When we're talking about venture scale, especially with what I learned at Freshbooks, what we tried to build at Wisely, when I think about working with the early stage companies that I do now, there's a big difference to me. Like when we talk about what is venture scale, that going through that S curve, going through that massive growth, whether it's massive growth in revenue or headcount or whatever it is, massive change. When you're going through that, you are very much just holding on for dear life and trying to operate as effectively as possible. But that means that in order to come out successfully at the other end, you just have to focus on what matters. And that means that you're going to let a ton of fires burn in the corners. Sometimes they become really big fires that are really painful to deal with. And I still think the right answer is just let them burn. They are not the thing that's going to, that fire is not going to burn the whole thing down. It is extremely painful. The people going through it are probably super stressed, and it's important to support them. But that's like, it's not a slow the plane down to put out that fire. It's the plane is going as fast as you can't slow it down. Hold on, figure out how to continue building the plane. And if a piece falls off, figure out how to deal with that, but don't slow down. And that mindset is just so different than the way that you would de-risk at a corporate scale, that you would de-risk a non-venture scale business. And so to me, there's not like a right answer to how do you run this business? How do you run this team? It importantly to me comes back to what is the intent? What are you trying to do? Are you on that venture scale path? Are you trying to survive on that venture scale path? Are you not? Are you deliberately not on that path? And in that case, maybe you do de-risk things. So that consistent balance of opportunity and risk, and when do you take that risk, is something I think about a lot. Right.
So eventually you left FreshBooks. You went to co-found a startup, which is an interesting choice. I mean, that's, a lot of great entrepreneurs do that and they're very successful, and that's great. But I can't imagine like, okay, I'm in this company. I probably have a good salary. Things are going well. Let me just, take the biggest risk possible and start a business. So how did you come to that decision?
Yeah, it's, I think when I was thinking about leaving Freshbooks, I distinctly recall looking around for like other like VP of engineering roles or something that would be more of like a lateral path, just maybe different company, maybe more entertaining to me or something like that. But I think in the last like 6-ish months that I was at FreshBooks, I had been working with a close friend. His name is Artem Komrov. He had been working from day zero on something on this startup. He eventually narrowed down on like what that product would be. And when I left FreshBooks, it was really just a good opportunity to join something, I think, at the right time that had maybe gone through that initial like product ideation and how do you find something interesting to build. So it was an interesting enough opportunity to me. And I was certainly able to take that opportunity. But I also recall like when I was at FreshBooks, like asking people for advice of like, what do I do next? Do I just do what I'm doing at FreshBooks, maybe at a different scale, go bigger corporate, more teams, bigger scale? Mike McDermott, the CEO, co-founder of FreshBooks, was very adamant. He's like, no. Like if you have an opportunity to go and join a startup, like go do that. You're going to learn a ton. And I really appreciate that advice in retrospect. And I think at the time, because what I didn't know at the time is really how much the ownership and accountability and running that team and having not even just having the freedom to do what you want, but like having the responsibility to build that from the ground up and shape the direction of a company. You learn so much. My bubble at FreshBooks was very much focused on the product engineering team and the line of business that I was responsible for. But I didn't have to really think about the business side of it. I wasn't really truly owning the revenue side of it. I didn't I wasn't managing salespeople and the marketing team and having to balance like HR and costs and headcount and fundraising. Like I didn't have to worry about any of that. And I don't even think that was on my radar. And I think that's actually an important thing that many people in middle management don't ever have the opportunity to make that jump over into like an executive role at a larger company, smaller or whatever. But they can't get out of that, like I'm managing a team or I'm managing a department versus I'm actually an owner of the company. And what does that mean? And how does that change how I think about running the areas that I'm responsible for? So I feel like that was the big lesson that I learned at Wisely. And so maybe to give background on Wisely. So Wisely was a software platform for charities and nonprofits to improve their fundraising. We were trying to be a sales enablement tool. Basically, our belief was that most large charities, probably even small, medium charities, have an existing donor database that they're not using it as effectively as they could. It's sometimes easier to find a new donor than it is to go back to somebody who already donated to you and rebuild that conversation or re-engage in that conversation and get them to donate again. And to me, that was, to us, that was a massive opportunity. Especially, so our other co-founder, Wes Moon, came from a fundraising background, worked at U of T's fundraising group and Sunnybrook. It's like had seen fundraising at larger institutional scale. And when you work with those institutions, like you realize, or those nonprofit groups, charity groups, that you realize that they have access to thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands or millions of donors. That is, and they're just not talking to them. And what might be, I guess, not a secret, but people outside the space might not know, is that if you look at the pool of all donations, and this is true certainly in North America, but probably true everywhere, it is very much a Pareto principle, and like to an extreme. I'm pretty sure like 90% of the dollars that get donated come from much less than 10% of the donors. But they don't, those massive $1 million donation does not start as $1 million donation.
Right.
That person probably donated or got involved in some golf tournament or event and donated $100, and then $1,000, and then 10, and then $100,000, and then maybe the million. It doesn't start with $1 million. There are teams at charities and nonprofits that are sometimes focused on like just the first $10 donation, that they're more like marketing teams. And then there are fundraising teams that are maybe more like high-end sales teams that are like one-to-one relationships sometimes with transformational donors. But that missing middle is a massive opportunity. And so we were like, why don't we just build it was an ML model. Why don't we just build a dedicated ML model to basically like go and filter through all of this data and find the people who could donate and basically like feed those leads to fundraise and teach them to be more like business development or like BDRs at scale, do high volume, feed them like who's going to donate, when are they going to donate, how much you should ask for, and go. So that was the opportunity that was Wisely. Just after I joined, we went and fundraised. So we raised a $1.5 million round from.
I know very much about that because.
You do? Because you're one of the, or indirectly one of the investors?
Directly one of the investors, actually. It was actually, we were in the process of closing that deal when I joined that venture fund. Funny enough, I mean, you could always say in retrospect whatever you want, but the points I told the managing director of the venture fund at the time, I'm like, here are the issues with the company, and this is why I don't think it's going to get a venture scale exit. And funny enough, a couple of years later, he said, you know what, exactly what you told me was right. I didn't try to kill the deal because it was too new, but I did point out those interesting things. But I'd love to hear your perspective, why it wasn't. I mean, it was an exit. You guys did well. There was an exit, but it's not the type of exit that VCs are looking for.
It was not a venture scale exit. Yeah. And so I think that is a really important point to focus on. Wisely was not a commercial business success. It was eventually acquired. You could, and I fundamentally believe you could build a good sizable tech business around the type of thing that Wisely.
By the way, it's a great concept. That's why we loved it, right?
And this was to me the opportunity. We cared so much about the venture scale opportunity. To me, the opportunity was not get 100 customers, become a $10 million profitable business. Like, yeah, that's a good business. But again, going back to venture scale, like we raised from VCs, that was not the opportunity that they invested in. They invested in a fund returning opportunity. And to me, that opportunity was, we have to build this thing that can go big. We have to take a bunch of risks and hope that we can fundamentally change the way that these charities and nonprofits are fundraising. And either it's going to work or it's not going to work. And this was not just like a black and white outcome. It's like, well, we hope it works. Every decision that at least every decision that we deliberately took was along that line of venture scale. We wanted to raise dollars from VCs and not a group of angels, because we wanted people who were focused on the venture scale opportunities. We thought about architecting the system, building the product, reaching customers, managing the sales group from that venture scale perspective.
So we brought that up a few times at this point, venture scale. Can you define for people what that means?
Yeah. Again, I don't think there's an answer, but when I think of venture scale, it is, again, that S curve. And there are three components to that S curve. There's the beginning, like the flat part. And sometimes when you and I invest at the earliest stages of venture that we hope will eventually become a venture scale company, sometimes that time, it's sometimes hard. Maybe you're a little too early. You hope you're not too late. You hope that 2 days after you invest, the company will start to skyrocket.
Actually did that a few times. It's pretty amazing.
Exactly. But you can't predict the timing.
Right.
So there is the timing risk at the beginning. Then as soon as you start to hit that scale, and this is what I mean by like true venture scale. It's like everything is going vertical. Your revenue numbers are going vertical. Probably you're starting to hire massively and expand out your team. Like everything is just like going well. And all of the problems in your life are those fires burning in the corner, but that you just don't have time to even think about because you just have to hold on for dear life. And then at some point that probably plateaus. You hope it plateaus like later on in their life.
You're a multi-billion-dollar business.
or if it starts to plateau, this is sometimes where you build like a second line of business that also is going to have an S curve. So there's lots of nuances there that we could talk about. When I talk about venture scale, it is specifically that vertical growth.
When you're at the flat part, how do you determine whether or not it is the type of business that can get that kind of growth?
Again, you could ask 100 VCs this question and probably get 100 different answers. Some people,
they're all going to be wrong except for what I'm going to say.
Potentially fair. So lots of people think that you want to build in a massive market, an already built big market. Some people think you want to build not in a big market, but a market that's growing very quickly, that the market itself is going to have that. Some people think that it's the technology transitions that we're going through. We're going through AI today. No one's going to argue that AI is not going to lead to a bunch of venture scale opportunities. I mean, look at what happened with OpenAI. So to me, there has to be enough of those potential S curves to invest in a company. And when I think of venture, there's enough of those S curves that kind of align to say that there's an opportunity. We were at a point where AI was starting to become, or ML at the time was starting to become useful from the perspective of we can dive through all of this data, very quickly find the biggest and best opportunities for biggest and best potential donation opportunities. We thought that we could grow the product and grow the sales team, that product, balancing that product market fit. We thought we could grow there. And so everything came back to that venture scale. And it wasn't a matter of building a bootstrap profitable business in the least risk way possible. Like we were taking tons of risk. We grew our engineering team quicker than we should have at the time. We grew our sales team definitely quicker than we should have at the time. I think that's probably also what led to not hitting that venture scale opportunity. But even in retrospect, like, yeah, there's a ton of lessons. Yeah, there's a ton of things we should have done differently. But when I think back, we didn't fail because of the things, like we didn't unexpectedly fail. We knew we were burning that much. We knew we were trying to grow that much. We just didn't we weren't lucky enough. We didn't hit the right opportunity. Should we have extended that runway? Should we have, again, we were in that flat part before the verticalization growth or vertical growth. Should we have tried to extend that? We had considered raising another round, basically, let's say a seed 2. And we all said that like the intention from the beginning was go big or go home. Maybe we could have been more explicit about that with our VCs, who probably would have cautioned us a little bit more than maybe they did. But I think when we went to decide, do we raise the round? Do we look for an acquisition? Do we just shut it down? I think the decision we made was not like we weren't burnt out. We weren't saying this isn't going to work. I think all of us still believe that there is an opportunity there, but we weren't hitting the right metrics for us to say like this is a rocket ship that we want to keep growing. So we weren't afraid to say, okay, let's take this acquisition and move on to the next thing.
Which is actually a very good point, because a lot of entrepreneurs in the same situation, they would not want to consider a suboptimal exit, suboptimal from the point of view of a VC scalable business. And they'll say, let me just go raise more money and try again on the back of another investor's capital. Once you saw it wasn't working out that way, you decided to call it, to say, let's at least get an exit here for our investors. I think that's actually a very good point. I've done something similar before as well. And that's very key. You saw that you weren't hitting the metrics and you said, I'm not going to risk more capital here.
Yeah.
Pursuing it. That's an important point. I wish more entrepreneurs did that. But.
And I think I also agree with that. And as investors, we can sit here and say that and hope that founders will listen to us. When I've invested in a company and I have that founder come to me and say, look, it's not working, I'm shutting it down. Or sometimes where I'm kind of pushing and be like, look, like you either need to like keep growing this significantly, like don't just settle, don't slow down. I'm okay with that. Like I have modeled our portfolio in order to have a certain number of failures, so to speak. And I realize that the founders going through that's an incredibly painful part. It's not working. They feel like they're failing. They feel like they're letting down their investors. Like I'm not trivializing the pain, frankly, that we went through when we were making those decisions. Like we did feel like we were letting our investors down. We felt like we were letting our team down. We felt like there was still an opportunity here and we were letting our customers down. But it was still the right decision for us to make at the time. And whether that was because we didn't want to burn more investor dollars, we didn't necessarily see that venture scale opportunity. Maybe we were just too early. If I were to look at like what's happened in AI, as soon as you have LLMs come out, I would have still built kind of the core of what Wisely was, but fundamentally different in today's world because of the opportunity with LLMs. And
Right.
so this was in when we raised our seed round. This was 2018, mid 2018. So as much as OpenAI had existed, like the Transformer paper had just come out, we were internally at Wisely transitioning from machine learning models to deep learning models. We were experimenting with some, like, can we build a transformer model here? Can we build a foundational model? What does that look like? We weren't doing it from the conversational LLMs. We were doing it more from a data prediction perspective. I still think there's an opportunity there, but we were not. I would almost say we were just a few years too early. Yeah.
Okay. So you exit Wisely, and then you eventually join a venture capital firm. You now run it, and well, tell people, what is the venture fund focus on? Not only from this basic criteria, stage and geography and type of business, but also your criteria for investment.
Yeah, that's maybe I'll transition into that. So one of our investors in the seed round was an angel investor named Dave Brereton. He himself was a tech founder from the .com days. He made a company in Montreal called Texas. They are public, TECSYS. And so since then, he had been angel investing and involved in tech. When we went to kind of figure out what do we do we raise a round, do we exit, we I think really met Dave. And we'd met him, but like we didn't know that much about Dave before that. But we realized that he had been acquiring some nonprofit tech, various types of tech, and kind of rolling it up all into one. And so it was a natural acquisition opportunity for Dave. So Dave runs his family office. He's always been very involved in that, and he was angel investing directly out of that. So when we got acquired by Dave and Dave's family office and kind of merged Wisely into that group of companies, Dave and I got talking. I am more of a technologist. I don't and a venture scale technologist. I didn't want to be at a working small company. So I had started to look for some other roles, CTO, VP of engineering. Maybe I think about starting something else. But I think at the time I wanted a break. But anyway, Dave and I got talking, and as he learned more about me, this will loop back to the venture side of things. I guess long wanted to be on the investor side, specifically in venture. Thought I had interesting perspective and how to find the right people, how to find the right types of companies. I've always lived kind of at the bleeding edge of technology, so I thought I had something to offer there. Dave agreed. Dave is very much someone who invests in people and trusts people. And so he gave me that trust. And so I started angel investing like Dave, got connected to Maple Leaf Angels. We did a couple investments. And very quickly, I think Dave saw just my lens on the world, saw how I thought about early stage companies, how I thought about building up a portfolio. And this is what has now become Sandhill North. So Sandhill North is the venture arm of Dave's family office. I'm a solo GP. No, I don't work with anyone else. We don't have any associates or analysts. And where we invest is B2B software, kind of a generalist within that. But really what every founder should understand is that every investor, even if they're generalists, they have particular things that they are interested in and care about. And so kind of pre all the giant LLMs and how everything is now an AI company, I was focused maybe more where my background was on fintech businesses, like my experience from Freshbooks. I didn't look at any gaming. I feel like I understand too much about the business of games to invest in gaming. But we were looking for B2B software that obviously could be venture scale. My network was in Canada. We were investing in Canada. And I'd say over the last couple of years, my focus has kind of fundamentally changed. Now mostly focused on US-based companies, particularly Southern California-based companies. Still B2B software generalist, so I'll kind of put that out there. But specifically, I care about like robotics, energy infrastructure, a little bit of space, AI, from a deep tech perspective, not foundational LLMs, but more on the deeper tech side of things. But still software only. So there's this like weird overlap of like deep tech and pure software. And that's where I like to sit now.
Very nice. What's the best business advice you've ever received?
I would probably bring it back to actually my people management days. We didn't spend too much time talking about this at Freshbooks, but at Freshbooks, I really learned to be a people manager, not a boss, not a project manager. But what does it take to keep the teams aligned, focus on the success of every individual employee, and just building that relationship and understanding how do you mentor and cheerlead and kind of encourage everyone to grow. I'll answer this from you should all read Radical Candor by Kim Scott. So the best advice I got, whether you're a founder, an investor, a people manager, is to read Radical Candor and really understand how do you inspire people and how do you grow people around you.
That's a great suggestion. I encourage everyone to go out and pick that up. Do you have any final words for entrepreneurs struggling today? There's a host of challenges facing entrepreneurs, especially in Canada, for a multitude of reasons. What's your advice to them?
Try to experiment more, especially with AI coming in the way that it is. We're going through that transition. So much is changing and is about to change. The way that you built a business 5 or 10 years ago is very different than the way that you build a business today. And I think this advice is probably mostly for the people on the venture scale path, but still probably is also true for building a small, profitable business as well. Is think about how your space is changing. Think about, and please do experiment with AI and push yourself to use it more and think about where those opportunities are going to be. It's so hard to predict where they're going to be. And so the more you can be involved in that today and be at the leading edge of that today, you'll have more opportunities. But you have to decide what path you want to follow. If you want to follow a venture scale path, push yourself to do that. If you don't want to be in that game, find those other opportunities. There's not a right way to build a business. There's not a right way to scale a company. You have to decide what matters to you, how you're going to do it, and try to be deliberate about it.
That's some great advice. Thank you, Ryan. It's been quite a great conversation. I learned a lot. So for the folks out there, if you like this kind of content, leave a like, subscribe, comment down below, all that fun stuff. We're going to leave more information about Ryan and how to reach out to him in the comments. So check that out. Not in the comments, sorry, in the description. So check that out. Thank you.